Well, I'm joined this evening with a friend, a long-term friend of mine, Andy Doig. He was one of the first people I met when I joined the SNP back in 1986. He's had a varied career since. He's an independent councillor on Renfrewshire Council, and Andy has just recently joined Salvo. So when I heard that exciting news, I was delighted he had joined. I asked Andy if he would write an article about what brought him round to that decision. And very interestingly, apart from giving us some reasons why he was supporting Salvo, he also mentioned Roland Muirhead, who was the creator of the first Scottish National Council. So I've invited Andy to come along tonight for us to have a short chat about all these matters and to take us forward. So welcome, Andy. The first question I've got to ask you is, why did you choose to mention and highlight Roland Muirhead in your first article?
Okay, Roland Muirhead was born in 1868, lived until 1964. He has been described by various people as the grand old man of Scottish nationalism. He campaigned for over 60 years for Scottish independence. He came himself from a Liberal Party background. He joined the Young Scots Society in the early 1900s, which campaigned for home rule within the empire. After the Great War, he then moved into the Independent Labour Party. He was a man of very strong socialist convictions. He moved into the ILP and funded their paper Forward for many, many, many years. He remained in the ILP, and then the ILP Home Rule Bill of 1926, the Johnston Bar Bill, as it was called after the two sponsors, fell. And this created a tremendous impact in Scotland, because it really galvanised, crystallised people's views that they felt really perhaps the only way forward is not to work through the Liberal Party, the Labour Party, or any party that fights on a UK basis, that what they needed was a national party that would fight on the platform of independence for Scotland. And he helped to form that. He became the first president of the SNP after it was merged with the Scottish Party in 1934. And he was a very influential person, not only because of his left-of-centre views. I mean, as the first SNP president, he actually steered the SNP very clearly, despite what our unionist opponents tried to tarnish the national movement with. The SNP in the late 1930s was explicitly clear that it opposed the kind of fascist dictatorships that were on the rise in Europe. He also was a strong champion of decolonisation at a time when that policy was far from being popular in the UK. So for these reasons, I felt that Roland Muirhead's work should be, and his memory should be honoured. To that end, I've also, as the local councillor for Lochwinnoch, where he lived and campaigned and died, the McCulloch Institute in Lochwinnoch has undergone a measure of refurbishment. So I managed to get a plaque erected in his memory to commemorate him.
Do you know, did the Scottish National Congress at the time, did it have much impact?
I'm sorry to say that I don't think it did. Between 1945 to 1962, Robert McIntyre and Jimmy Halliday and others, and Arthur Donaldson, were extremely focused on the fact that they had to build a party that could win votes. And I think this is because in 1951, the National Covenant got about 1 million signatures that wanted really devolution, essentially, not independence. They presented it to Churchill in, I think, 1951, and he said, that's fine, away and go and get a million votes. So, you know, they were very focused, quite rightly, on that electoral thing, that the party had to make gains at the ballot box. That's important. Other people took a different view. You had Wendy Wood and the Scottish Patriots, who actually, I mean, Wendy Wood ran some really effective campaigns to raise knowledge about, for example, the state of women's prisons in Scotland. She was imprisoned a few times, about the terrible state of women's prisons. She had a especially strong organisation in Fife She campaigned about living conditions in the Fife coalfields. She raised a lot of issues, and she did that via agitprop techniques in campaigns that captured the public imagination. So there was the National Covenant people who wanted devolution. There was SNP, there was the Scottish Patriots, and on the scene came the Scottish National Congress. Now, Roland broke away, having been SNP president from 1934 to about early 43. He was very, very disappointed about the lack of electoral progress that the SNP was making. So, kind of in the same spirit as the Scottish Patriots, he believed that agitation along the lines of Gandhian lines. He believed in non-violent civil disobedience. He believed in propaganda. He believed in demonstrations. He felt that this was the way forward for Scotland. So he founded the Scottish National Congress in 1950, and I think the organisation continued through the 1950s until his death. I think he fell for. I'm glad you mentioned Jimmy Halliday, a man that I remember as a young man and very much respected. Jimmy Halliday was a lecturer in the college sector. I think he was very, very. This was the time of the Cold War. He was very anti-communist. Roland Muirhead in 1957 had written to Khrushchev appealing to the USSR to stand up for Scotland's right of self-determination. This really got in the wrong side of Jimmy. So I think Roland either left or I think he was told, if you don't leave, you're going to be booted out. So I think he did come back to the SNP eventually, but he formed the Scottish National Congress, and he believed in, a bit like Salvo, he believed in some ways that you need to have some kind of forum for people of different parties that believe in independence. And I think there's a bit of value in that today. There really is.
Well, I think the thinking that we've got in the Scottish National Congress that we're trying to form is that it should be a people's Congress. In other words, it should not be dominated by political parties. If political people that are members of political parties get lucky and get in the ballot and join, that's great. But we are hoping that it's truly representative of the people of Scotland in much the same way as committees of the past. Before, when we were last independent, we had some bodies like that, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I don't think they've seen anything like Salvo before, because a lot of research has gone in, and we're already seeing the benefits of that research, in so much as the political agenda in the last years changed completely. There was no mention of the claim of right a year ago, or very, very rarely. You know, it's now centrepiece. We're now talking about the fact that we never joined a territorial union. Now, that's all come about because of the work of Salvo. It's changed the agenda. And I can tell you, I know there's more to come, and it's going to be coming very, very shortly. In fact, in a world exclusive, I'll reveal that next week we're having a summit, and there's a whole range of decisions going to be taken at this 2-day summit. And hopefully after that, we'll be able to release the results of a lot of the work that's been going on for the last few months. So it's very exciting times. So you've joined at the right time, Andy.
Well,
because we're going to be moving things along quite speedily.
Well, that is excellent, Iain, because one of the things, if you go back to 2013-14, one of the things that certainly really struck out to me was the fact that the complete lack of international traction that the Yes campaign had. I mean, you know, David Cameron, and I'm sure every British embassy in the world was going around trying to recruit as many foreign statespeople, as many leaders, you know, from the Pope to the Dalai Lama, to try and get them to come out and say they don't want independence. By comparison, despite the fact that the SNP had been in government about 5-6 years in Scotland, despite the fact we were really quite strong and established, what I think was disappointing was that the complete lack of international traction that we had. But that might have been because our own people are very ignorant about our own constitution, about the claim of right. And one of the reasons I've been attracted to Salvo is because I've always been a passionate historian, and I believe that you have got to know the historical grounds on which you stand. You've got to know the ground on which you stand. You've got to know the constitutional arguments. And most of all, you've got to be prepared to take the argument beyond the UK to international courts and the international community. You have to do that.
Well, I'm glad you've said that, Andy, because I certainly have absolutely zero faith in the domestic court system in the UK. I mean, the rules are written by Westminster, and they're the straw man that it's weak legislation, but they can always refer to it. And it also confirms the supremacy of Westminster within the UK, even though it's completely illegal, all the rest of it. It's two sovereign international nations that made the treaty, and it should be judged in international law. And I think that will be one of the major steps forward. If we can move this onto an international basis, as well as arguing domestically, then I think we'll be in a much stronger position.
Absolutely. And I think your point as well, Iain, was very good in relation to the kind of community assemblies and community involvement that the original Scottish Parliament had. That's very much in tune with what people are saying now about citizens' assemblies. In various countries, there's been citizens' assemblies to discuss different controversial issues of the day and different kind of political proposals. So, I mean, what we're saying is new in a way, but in a way it's not new. I mean, if you believe in the doctrine of the sovereignty of the people, you have to give the people the final say. It's part of that is about elections, part of that is about electing representatives, but it's also about having other mechanisms where people can come together and express an opinion.
Well, I think the other thing that it brings, Andy, which changes the argument, is Salvo and Liberation focus the argument clearly on independence. There's no peripheral side issues. I mean, if you take the last week, we've had Nicola not being able to say, is a woman a man a woman, or whatever, And I mean, the media's just hoaxed onto that, and independence is in the dustbin. We've now got the ridiculous situation where we're supposed to believe that she knew nothing about the 107,000 her husband loaned to the party, and she can't recall when she found out about it. Well, I mean, that to me brought back the whole salmon trial all over again, where she couldn't recall anything every time she got into trouble. But I mean, I know my wife, and if I had loaned 7,000, never been 107,000, I'd had to talk to her first, or else I'd be in trouble, So, I mean, I think it's not a believable argument to be not told by your husband of that. But also, she's a party leader. She has a responsibility to be on top of the finances of the party. I find it inconceivable. I used to be in charge of the SNP's finances. I find it inconceivable that the party leader would not be informed that the party was taking a £107,000 loan from the husband of the party leader. I mean, there's no way that would possibly happen. It's not a credible argument.
It does certainly show. I mean, I don't want to dwell on the private grief of the SNP, but there's still a lot of very good people in the SNP. I just think that they're being misled and misdirected. But certainly at the time when you were vice convener for administration and I was assistant national secretary in the early 1990s, and we were both in the NEC actually had teeth. It was a body that had a tremendous amount of influence in the party and could take real decisions. And it was really important at that time. And unfortunately, that is the demise of the NEC has unfortunately been a byproduct of devolution. That the democratic mechanisms of the SNP have been encouraged to wither and wilt, and it's only through a popular campaign, I think, that National Council, having been killed off disgracefully a few years ago, is now apparently been brought back to life like Lazarus.
Yeah, but not in the same format. I mean, the National Council in our day, any member of the party, any branch of the party could put direct questions to the office bearers in front of the entire party. And, it met every 3 months. And if you were a national office bearer, as I was at the time, if someone asked me a question and I didn't have the answer, and I would then say, I'll have the answer for the next National Council. If I'd
Yeah.
turned up without the answer, you'd have been hung, drawn, and quartered, because that was the power the membership had over the leadership of the party. And that's been lost, and it wasn't an accident. It was done through Angus Robertson's constitutional amendments, which created all these appointed posts on the national executive rather than elected posts. And, that was the power grab. But I mean, I don't want to dwell on it either, Andy, because, the whole purpose of Salvo and Liberation is to get away from all that. But yeah. Salvo's doing well. Membership's good. And, in the next week or so, we're going to be setting up, I think it's over 20 hubs across the country. And that'll be hugely exciting once that starts, because there's so much activity can come from that.
Well, I think one of the influences of the first Scottish National Congress and the second might be that we need to maybe look at things like agitprop techniques. We need to look at, we've now got social media, which they never had in the 1950s. There are really a lot of ways that we can reach out to people above the heads of politicians, above the heads of the establishment, in order to say, look, this is the case of Scotland's doctrine of sovereignty of the people. This is the case. This is the rock in which their argument rests, and you need to come and support it. It's important to fight at the ballot box. You've got to continue doing that, and you've got to win elections. That is really important. But that's not the only fight. You've got to fight. You've got to take the campaign into the villages, the schemes, the communities, in order to win people over. And you'll only do that by popular engagement and using satire, using humour, and using different arguments. And the thing about Salvo, why Salvo attracts me, is it's over and above an umbrella organisation that's committed to independence. So any kind of party considerations don't necessarily enter into it, because it's an unfortunate rule of politics that the stronger a party becomes, the more it's likely to maybe think of its own interests rather than the people's interests. And that's just a law of politics, that the further it becomes part of the establishment, the more difficult it will be to enact the will of the people. And that's a dynamic that we need to always be wary of.
I think that's very sensible, and I think that's the experience, is it not, of the last number of years, that there has been this dominant party who, for whatever reason, believe that they can move their priorities about and everything will just stay the same. We don't want any party to stay the same. We don't want the argument to stay the same. What we're looking for is progress. And I think that will come, as you say, through popular campaigning. The thing that made the difference in 2014, and I know it because I was going around doing it with Jim Cllr in the back of the Margolmobile, we were getting into these schemes and we were creating heat. We were creating real excitement. And if you get around Scotland, the schemes voted overwhelmingly yes. We were let down elsewhere where the campaign wasn't as effective. But I want to thank you for coming along and talking to us tonight. And I'm sure there's lots of Salvo members out there that will be delighted what you've said tonight. And you'll get a very hearty welcome at our future events. So thanks very much, Andy. Much appreciate it.
You're welcome, Iain. I look forward to attending some of the Salvo events and to doing anything I can as an activist, as a campaigner, as a councillor, in order to help the cause.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks,
good night,
Iain.
everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. Andy's an absolutely solid guy, exactly the type of people we need to join Salvo. So get out there and let's find a whole lot more Andys.